Blood-curdling screams pierce the night. Mangled bodies litter the forest floor. Entire families vanish without a trace. This isn't the plot of some B-grade horror flick. This is the reality of the land between the lakes, a 170,000-acre death trap straddling Kentucky and Tennessee. For decades, this seemingly idyllic wilderness has harbored a secret so terrifying, so beyond the pale of what we consider possible, that those who know the truth can scarcely believe it themselves. Forget everything you think you know about the natural world. In the land between the lakes, mankind isn't the apex predator. We're prey. And the creatures hunting us, they're unlike anything science can explain. Welcome to ground zero of America's greatest cryptid conspiracy, a place where dogmen stalk the shadows. Bigfoot isn't just a legend, and a beast so savage it's known as the face-eater roams free. This is the story they don't want you to hear. The story of an ecosystem of nightmares, of government cover-ups, and of a war between monsters that's spilling over into our world. Buckle up, like and subscribe to DeadNet Studios now. Because the truth we're about to uncover might just save your life. Long before the first European settlers set foot in what would become the land between the lakes, the native tribes knew of its dark power. The Shawnee spoke of shape-shifting shamans who could take the form of monstrous beasts. The Ojibwe passed down legends of creatures that walked the line between man and animal. According to Ojibwe lore, 4 races descended from the original wolf primes: the Anishinaabe, good humans; the Mayingan, now known as the Dogman; the Sabe, what we would call Bigfoot; the Gugwe, the wolf-headed Bigfoot, a creature of such savagery that it's said to devour the faces of its victims. These weren't just stories to frighten children. They were warnings, passed down through generations, of very real dangers that lurked in the shadows of the forests. As European trappers and settlers moved into the area in the early 1700s, they too began to report strange sightings. Shadowy figures that moved with impossible speed through the trees, eerie lights that danced over the lakes at night, and sometimes the discovery of mangled bodies, torn apart by something far stronger than any known predator. But it was in the 20th century that the true horror of the land between the lakes would begin to reveal itself. In the 1960s, the US government made a decision that would change the face of the region forever. Under the guise of creating the Land Between the Lakes National Recreation Area, they forcibly removed over 700 families from their ancestral homes. But the official story barely scratches the surface of the truth. What was the real motive behind this mass eviction? What did the government know that it wasn't telling the public? This mass displacement left behind more than 220 small family cemeteries, some dating back to the early 1700s. As families were driven out, unusual activities were reported in the area. Unmarked vehicles were seen combing the forests and caves, and personnel in strange protective gear were observed examining the land. The true purpose of these operations remains unknown to this day. These graveyards became silent witnesses to centuries of struggle, loss, and something far more sinister. Many believe that the disturbance of these sacred grounds awakened or intensified the supernatural forces that had long lain dormant in the area. Was this the government's intention all along, or did they unknowingly set in motion a chain of events that would unleash unimaginable horrors? What followed was a series of encounters and attacks that would cement the land between the lakes' reputation as one of the most dangerous and mysterious places in North America. The question remains, did the government's actions inadvertently create a playground for dark forces, or were they desperately trying to contain something that had already awakened? The 1970s marked the beginning of a new era of terror in the LBL. Reports of a creature that would come to be known as the Dogman began to surface, describing a beast that seemed to be a nightmarish fusion of man and wolf. In 1973, one of the earliest documented Dogman attacks occurred. A family camping in the LBL fell victim to an assault so savage that it defied explanation. When law enforcement arrived at the scene, they were confronted with a tableau of carnage that would haunt them for years. Bodies lay torn apart, bearing wounds that no known animal could have inflicted. But it was in October 1979 that the true horror of the Dogmen was revealed in all its terrifying glory. Glenn, an employee of the Kentucky Fish and Wildlife Resources, became an unwitting witness to an attack that would haunt him for the rest of his life. On what should have been a peaceful early morning fishing trip, Glenn observed a dark figure near a campsite. As he watched in mounting horror, the figure stood upright, revealing itself to be a bipedal creature covered in hair, with features that seemed to blend canine and feline characteristics. Paralyzed with fear, Glenn could only watch as the beast savagely attacked two unsuspecting campers, tearing them apart with a ferocity that seemed almost gleeful in its brutality. The trauma of that day, coupled with an apparent cover-up by authorities, silenced Glenn for over 4 decades. It was only on his deathbed facing terminal cancer that he finally revealed the truth of what he had witnessed that fateful morning. If the 1970s had been a prelude to terror, the 1980s would prove to be a symphony of horror for the land between the lakes. The decade was marked by a series of attacks and disappearances so brutal and inexplicable that they pushed the boundaries of what many thought possible. In the early 1980s, a family camping in LBL suffered a fate so gruesome that it seemed to defy the very laws of nature. The father and son were found outside their camper, their bodies torn apart with a savagery that spoke of something far more than a simple animal attack. Inside the camper, the mother's body bore signs of a desperate struggle, a final, futile attempt to survive the unthinkable. But it was the fate of the young daughter that truly highlighted the otherworldly nature of their attacker. Her partially consumed remains were discovered high in a tree, a grim trophy that no known predator would or could have left. The horrors continued unabated. In 1980, the brutal murders of Carla Sue Atkins and Vicky Stout sent shockwaves through the community. The young sisters' bodies were found in shallow graves within the LBL, their deaths a grisly reminder of the dangers lurking in the shadows. Despite extensive investigations by local law enforcement and the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, their case remains unsolved to this day, fueling speculation about the true nature of evil stalking these woods. But perhaps the most chilling incident of the decade occurred in early April 1982, an event that would come to be known as the LBL Massacre. Near what was once called the Star Campground, a family of 4 fell victim to an attack of unimaginable brutality. The scene was so horrific that it required the involvement of 6 coroners, some called in from out of state, to process the carnage. The injuries on the victims defied explanation, matching neither the patterns of known animal attacks nor those typically seen in human-on-human violence. It was this incident that gave rise to one of the most compelling eyewitness accounts of the Dogman. A man known only as Roger claimed to have survived the attack, providing a harrowing account of the events that unfolded that day. According to Roger, he was preparing for some target practice with his shotgun when he heard the screams of the family he was traveling with. Emerging from their motorhome, he witnessed the son, Stephen, being mauled by a large, black, hairy creature. In a desperate attempt to save the boy, the father, Levi, grabbed Roger's shotgun and fired at the beast, hitting its shoulder and forcing it to drop Stephen. But the shot only served to enrage the creature further. With a blood-curdling growl, it lunged at Levi, mauling him before throwing his broken body to the ground. The beast then turned its attention to the mother and daughter, Diane and Connie, who were hiding inside the camper. With terrifying strength, it broke through the back window of the vehicle and slaughtered the 2 women as Roger, having crawled underneath the camper, listened in horror to their final moments. In the aftermath of the attack, Connie's body was found about 50 feet from the camper, apparently carried there by the wounded creature before it succumbed to its injuries. The beast itself was discovered dead, having managed to climb a large tree before perishing, a detail that added an even more surreal element to the already nightmarish scene. As reports of Dogman attacks continued to mount, a far more terrifying reality began to emerge from the dark forest of the land between the lakes. This wasn't just a case of isolated incidents or random cryptid sightings. What researchers and cryptid hunters uncovered was nothing short of an all-out war, a savage, primal conflict that had been raging in secret for generations. At the heart of this brutal struggle were 2 legendary creatures, the Dogman and the Sasquatch, or Bigfoot. These weren't the cuddly cryptids of campfire stories or blurry photographs. These were apex predators, locked in a life-or-death battle for supremacy over the LBL. Eyewitness accounts painted a chilling picture of the conflict. Campers reported hearing bone-chilling howls and earth-shaking roars echoing through the night, followed by the sounds of titanic creatures crashing through the underbrush. Dawn would often reveal scenes of carnage, trees uprooted, massive claw marks gouged into rock faces, and disturbingly, patches of both coarse fur and hair-covered skin left behind in the wake of these clashes. Some researchers posited a clear territorial division. The aggressive, pack-oriented Dogmen claimed the northern reaches of LBL, while the more solitary Sasquatch kept to the southern forests. But as sightings increased, it became clear that these boundaries were fluid, with violent skirmishes erupting wherever the two species crossed paths. The ferocity of these encounters was unlike anything in the natural world. One forest ranger, speaking on condition of anonymity, described stumbling upon the aftermath of a Dogman-Sasquatch battle. It was like a bomb had gone off in the woods. Trees snapped like twigs, blood everywhere. And the smell, this overwhelming stench of wet dog and something older, muskier. I found what looked like a Bigfoot arm just torn clean off. Whatever did that, it ain't natural. And it sure as hell ain't something I ever want to meet. But even as evidence of this cryptid war mounted, some researchers began to question the narrative. Martin Groves, a respected cryptozoologist, reported instances of cooperation between Dogmen and Sasquatch. While rare, these sightings suggested a more complex relationship between the creatures than simple enmity. The answer to this puzzling behavior may lie in one of the most shocking discoveries in cryptid history: the Rougarou. The Rougarou is a Bigfoot creature that is said to have a canine-like snout, standing 6 to 7.5 feet tall. Its appearance is a nightmarish blend of gorilla and wolf, representing a new apex in cryptid evolution. But more than that, it represented a bridge between two warring species. The Rougarou may be a hybrid, the offspring of Dogman and Sasquatch. It sounds impossible, but the evidence is compelling. The Rougarou has the raw strength and size of a Sasquatch, combined with the predatory instincts and pack mentality of the Dogman. It's the best or worst of both worlds. This hybrid theory shed new light on the complex dynamics of the cryptid war. While large-scale conflict between Dogmen and Sasquatch continued, there were now documented cases of small groups from both species working together, seemingly to protect young Rougarou. It's like Romeo and Juliet, but with more fur and a lot more teeth. You've got these star-crossed lovers from warring species coming together to create something new, and now both sides are fighting to protect their hybrid offspring. But if the emergence of the Rougarou offered a glimmer of hope for interspecies cooperation, it also heralded a new era of terror for humans unlucky enough to encounter them. Known as face-eaters or headhunters, the Rougarou displayed a level of aggression towards humans that shocked even hardened cryptid hunters. Reports began to surface of hikers and campers found decapitated, their heads seemingly consumed by some monstrous creature. These grisly discoveries gave rise to areas within LBL being dubbed headless valleys, no-go zones where even the bravest explorers feared to tread. As the cryptid war rages on, with Dogmen and Sasquatch locked in their ancient blood feud and the terrifying Rougarou stalking the shadows, one thing is clear: the land between the lakes has become a battlefield in a conflict beyond human understanding. And we, the unsuspecting visitors to this primeval war zone, may well be caught in the crossfire. As the frequency and brutality of cryptid attacks in the land between the lakes, LBL, escalated, a disturbing pattern began to emerge, one that pointed to a massive, coordinated effort to keep the truth hidden from the public eye. What started as whispers of government involvement soon grew into a roar of suspicion that couldn't be ignored. The first red flag was the sudden and inexplicable closures of campgrounds and roads within LBL. On paper, these shutdowns were attributed to routine maintenance or wildlife management programs, such as hog eradication. But locals and seasoned researchers noted an eerie correlation between these closures and reported cryptid sightings or attacks. It wasn't long before people began to question whether these maintenance operations were actually containment efforts. Reports of military presence in the area following violent incidents added fuel to the fire. Witnesses described seeing convoys of unmarked vehicles and black helicopters without identifying markings swooping in under the cover of darkness. Even more chilling were accounts of armed personnel in unmarked camouflage uniforms, their faces obscured, securing perimeters around attack sites and aggressively turning away curious onlookers. One incident in particular stands out in the annals of LBL conspiracy lore. In the early 1980s, following a Dogman attack so brutal it allegedly left hardened military personnel shaken, a special unit was reportedly dispatched from nearby Fort Campbell. Witnesses claimed to have seen a convoy of military vehicles entering LBL late one night, followed by the sounds of gunfire echoing through the forest in the early hours of the morning. Days later, rumors circulated of a massive creature's body being transported out of the area in a specially designed containment vehicle. Despite the numerous eyewitness accounts, no official record of this operation exists. Those claiming involvement have remained stubbornly silent, their lips seemingly sealed by forces beyond public scrutiny. This wall of silence has only deepened suspicions of a high-level cover-up. But perhaps the most damning evidence of a cover-up lies in what isn't being reported. The deafening silence from the media regarding some of the most horrific incidents in LBL history is, to many, proof positive of government intervention. Take, for example, the chilling account of Jan Thompson, a gas station attendant who had cultivated a friendly relationship with local law enforcement. Late one night, two officers she knew well stumbled into her store, visibly shaken. They described a crime scene of such unimaginable brutality that it defied rational explanation. Multiple victims had been torn apart, their bodies bearing wounds that no known animal could inflict. The officers spoke of claw marks that sliced through bone as if it were paper, and of a stench so foul it made hardened crime scene investigators retch. Yet in the days and weeks that followed, not a single news outlet reported on the incident. No missing persons reports were filed, no grieving families came forward. It was as if the victims had never existed, their horrific ends erased from history by some unseen hand. This pattern of information suppression has led many to speculate on the true extent of the government's involvement in LBL. Some theorize that the area serves as a testing ground for secret military experiments, possibly involving genetic engineering or the development of biological weapons. The existence of the Rougarou, a creature that seems to be a hybrid of Dogman and Bigfoot, lends credence to these wild speculations. Others posit that the government is engaged in a long-term study of these cryptids, possibly with the goal of harnessing their strength, speed, or other superhuman abilities. The frequent closures of certain areas within LBL could, in this light, be seen as efforts to create controlled environments for observation or even capture of these beings. Whatever the truth may be, one thing is clear. The land between the lakes harbors secrets far darker and more complex than most could imagine. As layers of deception are slowly peeled away, we're left with more questions than answers. What is the government really hiding in those woods? How long have they known about the cryptid presence? And perhaps most chillingly, what is the true nature of their interest in these creatures? For those brave or foolish enough to dig deeper, a word of caution. In the land between the lakes, curiosity can be a deadly trait. The shadows here run deep, and those who peer too closely into the darkness may find something peering back, something with sharp teeth, glowing eyes, and a hunger for human flesh. As the years have passed, the land between the lakes has continued to be a hotbed of mysterious disappearances, unexplained deaths, and chilling cryptid encounters. The 1990s and early 2000s saw a continuation of the pattern established in previous decades, with new generations falling victim to the dark forces that seem to permeate the region. In the early 1990s, a group of teenagers riding ATVs through the trails of LBL had a terrifying encounter with what they described as a dogman. The creature, standing over 7 feet tall and covered in dark fur, possessed a head that resembled a wolf's. The teens' consistent recounting of the event, coupled with the genuine fear that still haunted them years later, lent credibility to their story. The mid-2000s brought another chilling encounter when two fishermen on one of LBL's lakes reported seeing a dogman on the shoreline. They described the creature's intense gaze and the overwhelming sense of being stalked, an experience that prompted them to cut their trip short and flee the area. More recently, in June 2024, the discovery of an abandoned vehicle in LBL led to a murder investigation, underscoring the ongoing dangers that lurk in the shadows of this seemingly idyllic wilderness. The persistence of these incidents, coupled with the continued reports of cryptid sightings and unexplained phenomena, suggests that whatever dark forces have taken root in the land between the lakes show no signs of relinquishing their hold. As we reflect on the dark history of the land between the lakes, we are left with more questions than answers. The land between the lakes harbors secrets that defy explanation. Dogman, Sasquatch, and the face-eating Rougarou. Are they flesh and blood or something more? What dark truths lie buried in government files? One thing is certain. In LBL, the line between myth and reality blurs into a nightmare. The howls in the night aren't just wolves. The eyes gleaming in the shadows belong to something far deadlier. LBL's mysteries demand answers, but be warned, here the price of knowledge is often paid in blood. For those daring to seek the truth, DeadNet Studios continues to investigate. Remember, in the land between the lakes, ignorance isn't bliss, it's a death sentence. Stay informed, stay vigilant, stay alive.
In the shadows of the digital night, we wandered far and seen some sights, from haunting tales to eerie curiosity.